Hello, everyone, and welcome to this workshop for the Catholic Campus Ministry Association's Called Conference 2021. My name is Nicole Perone, and I am your workshop facilitator today for What Comes Next, preparing young adults for the transition from campus to parish life. So I'm happy to be with you today to be talking about this really important topic and just facilitating this conversation, even if it feels a little one way over these virtual realms. So let's get started. As a quick introduction to me, as I said, my name is Nicole Perone. I'm the National Coordinator of the ESTEAM program, which is a partnership between Leadership Roundtable and St. Thomas More at Yale. It is an initiative that focuses on preparing young adults on college campuses for the transition from campus to parish life and cultivate leadership skills to prepare them to be really engaged leaders in parish life post-grad. I'll talk a little bit more about ESTEAM later, but that is just one part of who I am. I'm also the chair of the Board of Governors for the National Institute for Ministry with Young Adults. I was a delegate to the pre-synod on young people for the 15th General Synod on Young People, the Faith and Vocational Discernment. I'm part of the development team for the USCCB's Pastoral Framework on Youth and Young Adult Ministry. So needless to say, I spend a lot of my time thinking about the role of young people in the church, where their voices can be plugged in, and how we can really build a church that is worthy of the gifts that young people have to share. In my past life, I was the Archdiocesan Director of Adult Faith Formation for the Archdiocese of Hartford, Connecticut, where some of my areas of focus included adult sacramental preparation, RCIA, and adult confirmation, lay ministry formation, and our Archdiocesan Women's Conference. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from, but let's get started today thinking about the big question at hand. What comes next? So I kind of see two categories here when we're addressing this question. What you do when young people are on campus and what happens when they leave, and how we can respond to sort of both of those situations. The former will be the larger chunk of this conversation today because we can only control what we can control. We can only work away in our corner of the vineyard and pray that good fruit comes from it. So we do the best we can there to equip young people to do something with what we did afterwards. So we're going to start with what you do with them now while they're still your flock, right? We're all called to be good shepherds in our own way. And so as campus ministers, you are the shepherd of this flock, which is wonderful. So what can you do while you got them to prepare them for what's going to come? I think the first thing you can do, and it's something that can be built into the continuum of pastoral ministry and any sort of planning for how you serve young people, is to really focus on knowing yourself. And this may seem so basic, but it's a building block skill that will benefit in myriad ways down the road. And so one area I'd like to identify right at the gate is sort of thinking about human flourishing. I had a friend who brought this up to me recently, and I haven't been able to get it out of my head, because I think if we equip young people to identify how they can best flourish in these areas, it'll pay off down the road. And of course, one of those areas is faith, but it also includes health, so your emotional, physical, mental, spiritual health, relationships, work, and finance. And you might be thinking, what does this have to do with campus ministry? But the reality is that healthy young people are our problem, in fact, are our concern. And so if we can support young people in finding ways to be healthy in all of these areas of human flourishing, to flourish in these areas, it will make it so much easier to make faith life a priority post-grad, because other things are healthy and there are practices in place that will make it more natural for faith to flourish. And then, of course, there are other ways of knowing, like love languages. I'm a big believer in the love languages. When we know what we need and can identify what others need, we can navigate relationships more effectively, be they between employer-employee, colleagues, friends, significant others, family members, etc. So when a person can identify what their love language is and perhaps find ways to identify the love languages of others, it helps to cultivate healthy relationships. Again, kind of going back to that human flourishing. What's another way to know yourself that really is the wisdom of the church? Vocation and discernment. To know one's vocation, to really discern one's gifts, is to connect to a part of who we are that is then only strengthened by ongoing spiritual practice and engagement in a faith community. Now, I'm sure there are many other wonderful workshops that are also going to address vocation and discernment. I think it's something that we can't talk about too much when it comes to how we serve young people, but that is something we can be working on while young people are in our pastoral circle of care, while they're at our campus ministry, and we can really help facilitate conversations around vocation. Who did God create you to be? What gifts did God equip you with, and what can you do with that? And then, of course, a part of knowing yourself is knowing that life is a balancing act, knowing what you need and when, and where you can give and when you can't. Understanding how you manage your own time and energy is a very critical skill. And again, this may seem kind of tactile and not super spiritual, but when we make all of these skills something we have in our toolkit, it's easier to apply them in a faith context. One of the most tactical skills we can equip young people with is to learn, when you have many balls in the air, which balls are glass and which are plastic, which are going to break if you drop them and which are going to bounce if you drop them, and which ones you can drop. I love that analogy because I think as we're juggling the million things that we juggle, which all of us experience, and certainly young people who are campus ministries experience in the college setting, there's a lot of balls in the air. And being able to identify what are the highest priorities, what can handle being dropped that you can grab later, is really important. And there's no hard and fast answer. It's different for everybody, but it's a very important skill. And if we teach that skill, or at least accompany young people in strengthening that muscle, over time, we can then make space for faith and being part of a faith community to be one of those balls in the air that we really don't want to drop. And that is also, in terms of the balancing act, something that then over time we learn how to build in time for that relationship with God. So faith life is a glass ball that I'm juggling that I must not break. How do I do it? So we can then equip young people with some of those skills, like scheduling prayer in the calendar in their phone, putting mass time in their planner, prioritize joining a small Christian community and putting that in the calendar, etc. These little life skills can be profoundly impactful to make room for the prioritization of faith life. So those are important places to start, I think, the ways of knowing oneself. And then that leads naturally into equipping young people to think about faith on their own terms. And what are some ways that we identify our faith on our own terms? I think the first is discerning motivations. Again, everything comes back to discernment, right? Being attentive to the movement of the Holy Spirit and what God is saying and doing. So when I think about my faith, why is this important to me? Why does this matter? What impact does my faith have on my life? Asking those questions, because we want to encourage young people's ownership of their faith life as a priority for them, not just something that was mandatory or obligatory growing up or important to other people who were important to them. Self-ownership makes it more sustainable post-grad. And once those motivations have been discerned, why am I doing this? Faith needs to be treated as a muscle. What do we know about muscles? First, muscles require exercise. With physical exercise, adrenaline kicks in. So what gets the blood flowing? The same question could be asked for spiritual practices. Something that interests you, and then something that can become a habit, because it's more likely to continue if you build the habit in college. So helping young people to find those things that interest them, that bring them into closer relationship with Jesus Christ and with the church, that can become a habit. If we help them cultivate those habits early on, it'll last. Which brings me to the second point about muscles. Muscles have memory, so it will kick in. Whatever practices move them in college, or perhaps even what sparked their faith growing up, will be that memory that their faith muscles hold, and that can be carried on. So that's something we can really help young people to determine, discern. And then, of course, once we've done this, you start developing the shape of your own faith identity. More likely than not, the young people in your care will be on their own after college, developing a singular adult life. And so even if they move back home, they'll start to distinguish priorities that are separate from their family or their home life, their roommates, their friends, etc. And in the college setting, they might have gone to mass or social events at your campus ministry with these people before and can still find communities of accountability, which is important, and we'll discuss that shortly. But none of this can be sustainable unless it's a priority of the individual. So what we can do is to help young people identify the answer to what is important to you. What prayer practices, service opportunities, styles of worship bring you closer to the Lord? Because identifying and committing to those things form a faith life that is unique to each person, but more importantly, sustainable. And of course, part of the taking shape of one's faith is grappling with questions and doubt. That's part of the journey. We're not in this ministry to make mindless robots who repeat the catechism by rote, or even who worship and pray exactly the way we do. We're here to cultivate relationships with Jesus Christ that set people on fire with the joy of the gospel and ignite lifelong journeys of discipleship for them. So make room in your campus ministry setting for young people to ask questions, to doubt, to struggle, to grow, to do it on their own and do it in community, instead of attempting to supply all of the answers, which, since none of us are Jesus Christ himself, we can't supply all the answers anyway. The best thing we could do is walk with them in the chaos, in that unknowing, in that doubt, even if it means, like Emmaus, walking in the wrong direction for a little while. That gives young people the chance to ask those questions, to grapple, and their faith will take its own shape. And then, of course, what's something else we can do? Equip them with a robust toolkit of spiritual practices. I'm a big believer in the toolkit. Everything's a toolkit because there are different tools for different moments, different settings, different reasons. And having a toolkit will be part of guiding young people to the right faith community post-grad. The church, the Roman Catholic Church, is a rich buffet of spiritual practices, many of which even exist in other spiritual traditions that already kind of pique the interest of young people in a more secular fashion, like silence and meditation. So expose young people to as many spiritual practices as possible to try, because you don't know which one will really nourish them, whether it's the rosary or Taizé prayer, Eucharistic adoration, praise and worship music, reading Ignatian spiritual writers, reading the early church fathers or church mothers. We have so much to offer that it would be a wasted opportunity to only offer one bite of the whole buffet, because you just don't know what's going to be your favorite food. So that's one way to ensure the toolkit starts to get filled up. Another way to equip the toolkit is to wrap other, perhaps less spiritually forward activities with spiritual and theological reflection to keep the gaze fixed on why we're here. So a spiritual eye on seemingly secular practices is an invaluable skill for continued faith engagement. What are some examples? If you're engaging in a service project, doing reflection afterwards on the gospel and Catholic social teaching, which we have a beautiful and rich tradition of. If you're offering a wine and cheese social for graduate students, maybe offer a brief invocation on community, or invite a scholar to share on the spiritual role of wine, which ties back to our Catholic identity. Okay, so you're seeing something I would really like there, but that's just a couple examples of many ways we could kind of do a spiritual or theological wraparound to something where folks might be drawn in because it may seem slightly more social. The point is, if you accompany young people in these different styles, practices, and best behaviors, or really good skills now, they'll have them all in their toolkit for later. And when we're thinking about all of this, I want to draw our attention to this phrase, ecclesial confidence. I love this turn of phrase. We use it a lot in esteem when we talk about what we imagine young people on college campuses to walk away from esteem with that they didn't have before. Ecclesial confidence. So when I talk to young people, many of whom are my peers, but young people in general, but especially working young people, young families, people kind of in those sort of really transitional stages of young adulthood, and I ask them about why they struggle to find a faith community or to take a more active role in their new faith community than simply attending Mass on a Sunday. The number one concern I hear is this sense of insecurity. Well, I don't really know what I'm looking for, so I don't know how I could register as a parishioner. Well, I didn't study theology, so how could I be a catechist in religious ed, or how could I serve on the parish council? Incidentally, as someone with multiple advanced theological degrees, trust me when I say we do not need only that gift. We need every part of the body of Christ. My point is, everyone has gifts to bring, but more importantly, everyone has a baptismal right and responsibility to be part of the Christian community. So there should be as few barriers to entry as possible. And every member of the faithful, any age, any stage, should feel empowered by virtue of their baptism to engage in the Christian community. Now, Esteem exists to do just that, to form young leaders, especially upperclassmen looking toward the transition out of campus ministry into post-grad life, and equip them with that ecclesial confidence to enter into the life of the church and bring the best of their gifts to bear good fruit, to feel like they belong there. For example, I'm not worried about whether an accounting major can balance a budget. I'm more worried about why the accounting major isn't sitting on the parish council bringing that gift, or the parish finance council, more importantly. Ecclesial confidence is a sustainable skill. It outlives any program, it outlives any setting, it outlives any stage of life. A 22-year-old, a 45-year-old, a 70-year-old, all deserve the ecclesial confidence to feel like a valued, engaged member of their community of faith. So if you would like to talk about Esteem and whether it'd be a good fit for your campus, we'll talk about it at the very end here, but shoot me an email and we can chat, which would be my delight and pleasure. But let's get back to this. So ecclesial confidence is something we can really focus on together as campus ministers, to say, how do we equip young people with ecclesial confidence so they feel like they can walk into a parish and feel valued, feel like they belong there and truly belong there. Another point that I think is really important when we're thinking about what we can equip young people with to prepare for like post-grad is thinking about being protagonists of ministry. Pope Francis has made this pastoral way a hallmark of his pontificate. He's been referencing it years before the General Synod on Young People, but he was especially attentive to it during the synodal process and in Christus Vivit. So I wanted to pull this quote here from Christus Vivit 174. Pope Francis talks about young people being the protagonists of change and of transformation, not being observers, but getting involved. And I think this is a beautiful way to look at things, because Pope Francis is speaking directly to young people here, but also to all of us who serve young people. It's a strong exhortation not to be passive, but to be active, to be the driving force behind change, transformation, ministry. So what does it mean for us? Some of us might be young people, but really this is to the whole people of God, right? In terms of our campus ministry work, we are not providers of goods and services in campus ministry. We are ministers, we are accompaniers, we are equippers. And the more we empower the young people in our care to be protagonists of their own ministry, to really own their faith and engage with it on their own, the better we set them up for a lifetime of discipleship post-grad. And that's what we should be aiming for every day in our ministry, not what happens in the 4+ years that they're in our campus ministry, but what's coming afterwards. And so in that spirit, let's talk about what comes afterwards. What happens when they're leaving? What have we put in the toolkit that we can help engage young people in parish life postgrad? They can feel ready for it. So on the other side of campus, of course, the big question is always finding a parish, right? I can't tell you how many times I hear that, and I'm sure you do too. How do I find a parish that's right for me? How do I find a parish that is welcoming and hospitable to young people, that's going to give me the same vibe as my campus ministry? Finding a parish is a tricky beast to navigate for anyone, anytime, anywhere. It can be profoundly difficult for young people, especially leaving a vibrant community in their campus ministry, which I'm certain was radically hospitable, super formative, engaging young people at every turn, and then to feel kind of like you got plucked out of that space and dropped into this new place where you work and live can be a little disorienting. You're sort of looking around going, what? Where do I go? And there's not really a roadmap. So what's something we can do that will be beneficial when young people leave is to begin conversations around finding parish communities in the lead up to graduation. Just to get the thoughts sparked in their heads can be very helpful. One practice might be to facilitate some field trips off campus to visit a parish if your campus ministry isn't part of a university parish kind of thing, to get a little sneak peek for those who are looking toward graduation of what it would be like to walk into a parish for the first time. I think a context where there could be some anonymity and really see what it's like in real time, as opposed to feeling like, oh, the young people are coming. No, see what it would be like if you came cold to a parish. How would that feel? What are some things you can look for and be attentive to? Would be a good practice. Now, some people encourage shopping around or parish hopping, and generally I am one of those people. I do think it can be a good practice, but I think the distinction is not to encourage true hopping as a permanent practice, but more to encourage a discerning spirit. So checking out some different communities to figure out where you're fed is an important start, but encouraging young people to discern the right community for them, and then discern how to be an engaged member of that community. So it's not sort of all or nothing. You got to find a parish and commit to it right away and register, and now you're set for life, and not parish hop for decades and decades and never really commit to a community. I think there's a middle way. And for me, the middle way would be check out some of those communities, figure out what's pulling you, and do the good discernment and figure out where your gifts are best placed. Now, of course, when thinking about where to find a parish, there, of course, are easy ways to start. One is with alumni. Where are fairly young alumni? Where are they worshiping? So if you know they're in certain cities or certain places at certain parishes, or at least connected to them, that could be a natural place to start. And that kind of brings me to my next point, thinking about an alumni network. So of course, recent alumni are your best case scenario because they're kind of in similar ages and stages to your current student population. But retaining those connections helps because you'll get some parish recommendations from young adults who ideally have already found their way post-grad and can maybe share some wisdom, some experience. Oh, this kind of gives me the same vibe as our campus ministry, or, oh, I had a bad experience here, so maybe don't go crazy with them just yet. That's one option. Of course, alumni can also become a community of accountability. So finding young alumni to go to Mass with, or even just to get some general local recommendations, like what's a great place to go to for post-Mass brunch, in a post-COVID reality. That is good for everyone in a variety of ways to keep young alumni connected to current students and future alumni. And that benefits your ministry as well, right? To have a strong alumni network. And then as we're thinking about this life post-grad, this time when folks are post-grad, it's that ecclesial confidence and a full toolkit. If we've equipped them with that ecclesial confidence and that full spiritual toolkit, we can empower young people to take a bite out of their faith life in the next chapter. But I want us to be attentive to how we can encourage young people to be discerning in that and not overcommitting. So some folks encourage people who are new, in post-grad life, to immediately find a ministry to get involved with at a parish. And I'm not the biggest fan of that way of doing it. And here's why. In the RCIA process, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, when newly initiated adults, those who have completed the sacraments, in the RCIA process, they're sometimes encouraged by their parishes to immediately get involved in a parish ministry after the Easter Vigil. And most RCIA experts discourage this. And why would they discourage it? Because you're a brand new Catholic. You just got in the game. And so the retention rate of newly initiated in parish ministries after the Easter Vigil is very low because there's not much spiritual foundation yet. You're real new. So it's easy to fall away from involvement because you're still trying to build up your faith muscles. So the encouragement with RCIA is to have the newly initiated take the time to get their feet wet a little bit, really strengthen their spiritual practices, figure it all out, grow comfortable in this new faith reality for a minute, and then jump in. And so I tell you this to say that my same advice would be for young adults, newly graduated in the working world: don't bite off more than you can chew. You don't need to jump into a parish ministry right away. First order of business, there will be a time management issue. I am here to say it doesn't matter how great you are at it. You're in this big moment of transition. So for young people with all these new demands on their time post-grad, suddenly you're working, hopefully full-time, right? And it's a lot. You're paying your bills, you're figuring out sort of general adulthood practices, you're socializing and trying to find a new community. You probably still have family obligations, perhaps a significant other, It's a lot on your time. So you're trying to figure out who you are in this stage of life and navigate all of those transitions. So then adding one more major commitment in a parish is just too much. So I would encourage you not to encourage young adults to overcommit and then have to back out, which is this stereotypical complaint about young people, right? This sort of flakiness. Rather, encouraging young newly alum to ease into this new chapter and figure out all of those pieces and then determine at such a right time when and where your gifts can be best maximized. I think that attentiveness and that discerning spirit really pays off, because then the commitment can have legs. It can really take root. So, in conclusion, we've said a lot. There are many important studies out there about what happens when young adults leave a campus ministry setting. There's a lot of important studies out there on disaffiliation, or perhaps the less formalized sort of dissolution of relevance. And so we know a lot about young people no longer associating with the church in formal and informal ways. I could pepper this workshop with all those citations, and I think all of those studies and the data are incredibly vital. But when I think about what we can do for the young people in our care to prepare them for life post-grad, my attitude, I think, is one of greater optimism. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Now, my Disney fans out there will get this reference. I'm a nominal Disney fan insofar as I was born in the 90s, but my husband is a big time Disney super fan. And so are our really dear friends with whom he sort of nerds out on these matters. And so from that, I know that A Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow is the theme song to Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. So I like this quote, there's a great big beautiful tomorrow, but for my non-Disney fans, perhaps we would look toward one of my favorite musical songs from Annie, The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow. Or for those who are not musical fans altogether, Scarlett O'Hara's wisdom from Gone with the Wind, that after all, tomorrow is another day. The point is, there's a lot to be hopeful for the future. There's a world of opportunity waiting for young people on the other side of graduation. And by equipping them now, we can ensure that a life of faith is part of that great big beautiful tomorrow. Now, before we go, I'd be remiss if I didn't chat just for a moment about esteem. Did we go backwards? There we go. Who says young people know what they're doing with technology, right? Esteem is a partnership between Leadership Roundtable and St. Thomas More Catholic Chapel and Center at Yale University. And again, I serve as the national coordinator. And Esteem is grappling with this same question that informed our entire workshop today. What do we do? What comes next? And how do we prepare young people for that reality? And so Esteem is a leadership formation program for Roman Catholic young adults on college campuses, and it's focused on preparing young adults to be engaged leaders in faith communities after graduation. So we're dealing with two questions. How do we engage young people in that transition, and how do we ensure they want to be really strong leaders, giving of all their gifts? So Esteem is designed to assist young adult participants on college and university campuses to reflect on their call to leadership, participate in this community of similarly amazing young adults, understand their baptismal responsibilities, and of course, develop some ecclesial confidence and discover ways to exercise leadership in the church. So what does that look like? Here's just a straight overshoot of the components of the program: an opening retreat, really robust curriculum that can take shape in a variety of ways on your campus, a mentoring connection with other adults who are living a life of faith, perhaps with other convergence of interests with these young people, attending a capstone conference in person. Yes, I can't wait to be back in person again. But attending a capstone conference with all young people from around the country who are participating in Esteem, with young alumni, national speakers, is a really dynamic time together. And of course, then being part of this broader alumni network. Esteem alumni are everywhere in the world. Just a quick overshoot of the components. I don't want to belabor those points too much. If you visit our website, you can see a little bit more. What do I love about Esteem that I think is relevant to our conversation today? First, Esteem is flexible. Its potential is maximized when it's enculturated into the life of your campus ministry, when we take it and figure out how to take the pieces and move them around and be malleable and put the skin of your context on Esteem. Esteem is also very faithful. It's inspired by Christus Vivi to encourage young people to be the protagonists of ministry and hone the leadership capacities of young people. Really grab those influencers of influencers who are going to be amazing in every other secular sphere and encourage them and empower them to bring their gifts to bear fruit for the church. And Esteem is sustainable. It's not a program in a box. You just open and 6 weeks later, magic happens, but it's lifelong formation, building skills and strengthening muscles that will bear good fruit for a really long time to come. So here's just a few of our sites just to give you a little quick shot of who's involved with us. If you recognize some of these universities or you have colleagues and friends who are serving at these universities, there are more, but just a few quick names that if you wanted to connect with them, please do visit our website, esteemlead.org. That's esteem, E-S-T-E-E-M, lead, L-E-A-D.org for more information. And if you'd like to chat, click on our website, send me an email, tweet to me, whatever works for you. I'd love to continue this conversation. There are no hard and fast ways to do this, but we can do this together in our conversations, in our collaboration, serving the same mission. So I thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being a part of CCMA Called, and thank you for all that you do to serve young people in our colleges and universities and in our church. Have a wonderful rest of your conference.